Shabbat Shalom. 5 years ago, a new podcast took the world by storm. And for those of you who still aren't avid fans of podcasts, it's a radio show, but on demand. People who had never listened to podcasts before were avidly tuning in to Serial, a true crime podcast which investigated one crime in installments, releasing new episodes each week. Over 80 million people downloaded the episodes of season 1, which explored the murder of a high school student, Hae Min Lee, and tried to answer the question: did Hae's ex-boyfriend, Adnan Syed, who was convicted for her murder, really kill her? Or was he falsely accused and imprisoned? Serial's fans listened with bated breath to the 12th and final episode of the season, desperate to learn the answer. Did Adnan kill Hae? When they tuned in, many were shocked to hear what Sarah Koenig, the show's host, had to say. After all of her careful investigations and deliberate considerations, this was her conclusion. I don't know. In the end, she didn't feel that she could say with certainty who had killed Hae. She was sure that there was insufficient evidence to convict Adnan, and she felt that if his trial had been conducted properly, he would have gone free. But she was not able to confidently say that he was innocent. The audience reaction was intense. Many were frustrated, flabbergasted that their avid attention was not rewarded with the clear answer that they had expected. Others, however, were intrigued. What an unexpected conclusion. After all, we are so accustomed, particularly from fiction, to mysteries being cleared up in the end, to a satisfying resolution to a story that pulls together all of the loose ends. In life, however, we rarely get such a neat ending, and the real-life investigation of Adnan Syed in the podcast Serial was no exception to that. In this week's Torah portion, we read about an encounter in which there appears to be absolute certainty. God speaks directly to the people of Israel and backs up that experience with miracles, including dramatic visual and audio effects, just in case the people needed further proof that they were really experiencing God. This absolute certainty, truth with a capital T, given from God to humans with no intermediate stops, that's what the people had in our Torah reading. Maybe. When we look closely, however, even within this story, there is a seed of confusion and perhaps doubt about whether the people are truly hearing from God directly. Immediately after the Ten Commandments appears in the text, we learn this. All the people witnessed the thunder and the lightning, the blare of the horn and the mountain smoking, and when the people saw it, they fell back and stood at a distance. You speak to us, they said to Moses, and we will obey. But let not God speak to us, lest we die. So did the people hear from God directly, or was what they heard mediated through a person, through Moses? There are several midrashim, several explanations from the rabbis that try to answer this question. Some believe that the people heard God speak all 10 utterances, and some believe that God spoke only 2. There's even an opinion that the people only heard God make the sound of the letter Aleph, the silent letter of the alphabet and the first in the 10 commandments, and that the rest was given through Moses. Maimonides learns a larger lesson from the idea that some commandments came straight from God, whereas others were given by way of Moses. He seizes on the Midrash, which claims that God spoke only the first 2 commandments, which are written in the first person, and that Moses spoke the last 8, which were written in the third person. Maimonides points out that those first 2 commandments deal with the nature of God. They proclaim that God exists and God is one. Those laws, Maimonides says, they are axioms. They can't be demonstrated or proven. You know the nature of God by having an experience of God. That's it. The other laws, however, are demonstrable, and their truth can be seen when we look at the world around us. They include commands like honoring parents, not murdering, and not stealing. We know they are true because, well, society tells us so, but also because we see that those rules make sense. They are necessary for the fundamental bedrock of a functioning society. Most truths, therefore, don't need to come from God. We can see their truth ourselves when we look around us. Even within our Parsha, the Parsha about revelation from God, we have a story about finding truth from other sources. Our Parsha opens when Moses' father-in-law, Yitro, comes to visit, and Yitro brings with him years of leadership experience as a priest in Midian. Yitro sees Moses' leadership style, realizes it is completely untenable, and gives Moses some advice about how to delegate, which Moses immediately takes. Moses recognizes truth when he sees it, even when the source is a person rather than God, and even when the source is a person who isn't even an Israelite. Later in the Bible, we have yet another model of finding truth. In the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, the people find a book that they haven't seen before, which is called the Torah, probably the book of Deuteronomy. They have a public reading of the book. They explain it to the rest of the people, and then the people do their best to follow one of its instructions, namely celebrating the holiday of Sukkot in a particular way. Professor Sam Fleischhacker, a professor of philosophy at the University of Illinois, writes about the parallels between the 2 experiences of receiving the Torah. In one, the word comes from God with signs and miracles. The people say, "We will do and we will hear," accepting it without even knowing the contents. In the other, it comes from humans who found it in a scroll, who believe and hope that it has some answers about how to live a meaningful life. They read it, explain it, and then immediately set out to follow through on at least one of the laws in it. Despite the lack of direct divine connection, the people trust what they hear. And in fact, Professor Fleischhacker sees this as in some ways a more compelling and realistic model for finding truth. Every day, we are faced with the same questions that the Israelites faced in the time of Moses and in the time of Ezra. Where do we turn for truth? We face this question when we go on Facebook and Twitter and even the news. We face it when we see all sorts of stories and warnings and infomercials and advertisements, and we wonder, is this real? Is this something I have to worry about? Is this something I should do or buy or make? We face this question when an organization asks us for money and when someone asks us to sign a petition. It is all around us. How do we know who and what to trust? Unlike the Israelites at Sinai, we don't have a divine voice telling us what to do. And if we think we do, generally that's a bad sign. We might be more like the people in the time of Ezra, doing our best, figuring out what seems reasonable and who seems trustworthy, and trying to make the best decisions we can with limited information. Like Sarah Koenig, creating the serial podcast, we might listen to as many people as we can, collect as much evidence as we can find, and place close attention to all the details. And we may still fall short of certainty. And yet, that doesn't stop us from living our lives. That didn't stop the people at the time of Ezra from celebrating Sukkot, and it shouldn't stop us from making the best determinations that we can. It also shouldn't stop us from living ethically. It shouldn't stop us from trying our best to sift through information that comes to us, seeking to discern the difference between truth and falsehood. There's a wonderful midrash that teaches us that the letters of the word emet, truth, are all on a solid foundation. The aleph and the mem and the taf, they all have 2 points on which to rest. Whereas the letters for the word sheker, falsehood, are all unstable. They all rest on a single point. Much of the time, upon careful examination, we can determine what seems accurate and what seems right when we truly listen and pay attention. May we all continue to seek the truth wherever we find it, to the extent that we can. Shabbat Shalom.